And so for me, it's really important that it does have a hook. But for a book to get published, it has to go through quite a lot of hoops. The editor has to get it through lots of meetings and that everyone has to buy into it. And the hook is quite a big part of that. It's used again and again in those meetings, and it's used for creating the cover and the marketing and things like that. So for commercial fiction, it is super important that you've got a really good way of pitching the novel.
Hello, and welcome to Ray of Light, podcast about reading, writing, and happiness with me, Eleanor Ray. I write uplifting book club fiction about hope, connection, and the unexpected turns life can take. Today's guest is very special. She is not only a best-selling psychological thriller author, but also one of the UK's most respected editors, working behind the scenes on some of the biggest crime novels of recent years. We'll be talking about the magic of the first 20 pages, what really happens inside publishing meetings, how she balances two creative careers, and the realities of life on both sides of the industry. I'm so delighted to welcome Phoebe Morgan to Ray of Light. Thank you so much for being on with us today, Phoebe.
Oh, thank you for that nice introduction. It's lovely to be here.
You're very welcome. Now, I'd like to start with you where I often do, your journey into writing, and in your case, publishing as well. Can you give us a little potted history, maybe, of how you came to publishing and how you came to be a novelist yourself?
Yes, of course. So I always loved writing. I was always making up stories when I was young. And I went on to do an English degree at Leeds University. And so after university, I actually trained to be a journalist because I liked writing and I thought that that was sort of the done thing. And although I think I learned a lot from it, I didn't really want to be a journalist. And I then had a friend who was working in publicity and publishing, and she was telling me a bit about the publishing industry. And so I started to apply for assistant jobs in publishing, and it's quite a competitive industry to get into. So I applied for lots of jobs, and then eventually I got a role as a publishing assistant at a place called Octopus Books, which is part of Hachette. And so I started off working on children's books, actually, and nonfiction, and then have worked my way up to be a fiction publisher, which is what I am now. And so that was how I sort of got into the publishing industry. And then the writing was something I was just doing on the side. I started writing more seriously in my early 20s. At the time, I was also working in a pub, and I was working as a babysitter and as a tutor because I needed extra money in London because, the salary in journalism was horrendously bad. So I just sort of started writing this novel in my bits of free time. And it was, at the time, it was called The Architect's Daughters, and then we changed the title to The Doll's House when it was published. And so that was my first novel. That's the one that got me an agent, and I was lucky because my first book was the one that sold, so I didn't have one in the drawer before that. And
Amazing.
That was in 2017, I think, and then I've written 5 novels since then. And as you said in the introduction, I just balance that alongside working in publishing. So I do both, and as you said, I can sort of see it from both sides of the fence, which I think hopefully allows me to give your listeners useful information.
It's fantastic. Thank you. And it's so interesting. I studied English as well, and I liked writing, but I didn't have in mind that I was going to ever be able to write a published book. And I went into journalism as well. And then I realized that I wasn't interested in current affairs, and it made me a dreadful journalist.
I actually also wasn't very interested in the news or in politics or anything like that. I just wanted to have a creative outlet. And
yes, the real world, not that interesting. Fictional world's much more fun.
And I liked the longevity as well of a book, being something that lasts, and the news obviously didn't.
You're an author and a publisher. When people ask you what you do, what do you say first? Editor, author?
Oh, I just say I work in publishing. I don't actually tell people that I write books very often.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. No, I don't really talk about it that much. I mean, I obviously talk about it on podcasts and stuff, but if somebody at a party or an event says, "What do you do?" I just say I'm in publishing. And I usually just say I'm an editor.
Why do you think that is? That's so interesting.
I don't really feel like a writer because I don't do it full time, I suppose. And because my day job is so important to me, and like I really do love being a publisher, and I love the business and the team and like all of that aspect of it. So I guess that feels much more my identity.
And do you think the two roles feed each other? Do you think you're a better author because of your editing experience, a better editor because of your writing experience?
I would like to think I'm a better editor because of my writing experience, because I do think I'm able to be more empathetic with my authors. So I try really hard to be a good communicator to my list of authors. I have about 15 authors at Simon and Schuster, which is where I work now. And I do really care about them, and I know what it feels like to be on the other side of the email, waiting for news or wanting to know your
Yes.
sales figures or getting your edits back. And so I think it makes me more kind of in touch with how my authors feel, hopefully. I don't really know whether it makes me a better writer. I think it gives me obviously a lot of knowledge about what does
Yes.
and doesn't work in the market and what people are looking for. I do try and share information with authors to make them feel more part of the process and for it to be more transparent. So I think I probably do that more than some other editors do.
Definitely do. Can you talk a little bit about your Substack and what you do there? I really enjoy reading it. I find it a real insight into what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, so it's a Substack called The Honest Editor, and I guess the clue's in the name really. And I write pieces about the industry. So there are lots of posts on there about what really happens in acquisition meetings, what it feels like to be on submission, lots of posts about, the different functions of the publishing industry. And there's a lot of interviews with literary agents and people from all the different parts of publishing. I've got some other ones lined up as well. There's some author interviews on there. And I really started it because I wanted to introduce more transparency to the industry, because I talk to a lot of authors who find it a really difficult process being published. And that makes me feel really sad, because actually it should be a positive thing. And I think for a lot of people, it can be quite hard on you mentally when you're not hearing from your editor, or you just don't know what's going on, and you don't understand why certain decisions are made. And I do get that. And so I suppose I thought, okay, well, what can I do to try and help this?
The problems that authors have seem unnecessary. It's just a lack of understanding about what goes on behind the scenes, because
Yeah.
everyone's basically got your best interests at heart. Everyone wants the books
Yeah.
to be a success. It's
Yeah.
just understanding why and how can be really
Yeah.
hard. So I really enjoy your Substack. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, while we're talking about being behind the scenes, can you tell us a little bit more about your editorial role, and maybe what would get you really excited when you receive a new manuscript? The first 20 pages, what would hook you in?
I think you can tell quite quickly if you're going to enjoy something. I can usually tell in the first page or two whether the voice is drawing me in. I run the commercial fiction list at SNS, so I'm always looking for stories that have really clear hooks and good concepts, and that's really important. And you can actually tell that from the agent's email pitch as well. You can usually see whether you like the idea. So I'm always looking for great writers with brilliant ideas. It is quite hard to stand out in today's market, I think. So I'm quite selective about what I buy. I really like to feel as though I'm in safe hands when I'm reading a new manuscript, like the author knows what
Yes.
they're doing. And I like stories personally with an unusual structure. I have published a lot of crime and thriller in the past, but in this role, I also publish general fiction. So love stories, historical, book club fiction, a bit of everything really. And we also have a brilliant science fiction and fantasy list. At the moment, I'm trying to buy a dystopian novel. So I kind of do a bit of everything as long as it's commercial. And so for me, it's really important that it does have a hook. But for a book to get published, it has to go through quite a lot of hoops. The editor has to get it through lots of meetings, and that everyone has to buy into it. And the hook is quite a big part of that. It's used again and again in those meetings, and it's used for creating the cover and the marketing and things like that. So for commercial fiction, it is super important that you've got a really good way of pitching the novel.
That's interesting. So it's the hook first, but it needs to be in the hands of a very capable writer. So you
Yeah.
could be a brilliant
Yeah.
writer, but if your book isn't really hooky enough, then it probably won't get through to that
Yes.
next stage.
And I have turned down writers before and said, I think you're a great writer, but this isn't the right idea, or like, this isn't going
Mhm.
to be the thing that cuts through for you, I don't think. And said, if you write something else, I'd love to see it.
A little bit more about hooks, because it's something you hear about a lot in the industry. What hooks have you had that you've loved? Can you give us an example of some really good ones?
I guess from stuff I've published, I remember I bought a book called The Chalet by Catherine Cooper. And I remember getting the email from the agent, and she said it was about a group of friends who go skiing and then a body is uncovered in the snow. And there's quite a lot of books like that now, but that one it came out before some of the other copycats, I would say, that came out. And it was just a great hook. It just like drew me in straight away because I got the setting and the idea. The agent got that across very quickly and easily. I've got a new novel by Sarah Vaughan, who is a brilliant writer behind Anatomy
Wonderful.
of a Scandal.
Yes.
And her new one is called Based on a True Story. And it's about a best-selling children's novelist who throws a 70th birthday party and gets an email the day before saying that someone is going to expose her secret. So I think that's a really good hook as well, because again, like you kind of get the concept and it's immediately intriguing straight away. And I also published a book called Girl A by Abigail Dean. And that is about a young girl who escapes from her family's house of horrors. So it's an abusive family situation. The story is told focusing on each of her siblings at a different time, which again, I really liked the structure of. But again, that was just a very clear proposition. And it doesn't mean when I talk about having a good hook, it doesn't mean that that's like the only good thing about the story. You know, you have also, there's a lot of nuance. And I think sometimes writers get worried that the hook can be reductive or it can feel sort of too commercial in a way. But I can't really stress enough how much we talk about it in-house and how it's always the question that, you know, the sales team will ask or the MD will ask. And so it is important. And we all know that we have also got to have a great storyteller behind the hook, and you've got to have the nuance of the characters and the different plot strands. Like that's all necessary as well. But the hook is, yeah, as I say, is very important. And I suppose it's all about capturing a reader's attention when there's so much out there. Like there's so many novels out there, but we're also competing for readers' time and attention with Netflix and podcasts and all these other forms of entertainment. So we want to try and get the messaging across quite quickly, especially this is mainly commercial fiction I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I imagine inside the publishing house, there are so many books. Not everyone who's going to work on the book will have time to read the book before they start working on it. So they need to have like an idea of what it is that's easily communicated, easy to remember.
Yeah.
And then when they're pitching it onto booksellers can't read every book. So it can be the best written book in the world, but you need to be able to say just like that what it's about. And then you know who to sell it to as well. And readers will get it as well. All of that is so important. And so interesting and so difficult as a writer to get right, because you've got this complexity of all of these wonderful things that are going on in your novel. But it's like, what is the essence? And is that essence something that you can communicate really quickly?
Yeah.
What do you think aspiring authors, or maybe authors early in their career, most misunderstand about the publishing process? What do people get wrong?
I think it's all about expectation. And again, I think it's very important that editors are honest with authors at the beginning of the acquisition process. And I have seen, unfortunately, examples of times where authors are left very disappointed because they think that their debut novel is going to be absolutely everywhere in all of the bookshops. I think it can be tough if you go in thinking that your book will just instantly become a bestseller. And that sounds really negative because obviously some books are bestsellers. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to publish authors who go on to be bestsellers, and it's a brilliant feeling and it is achievable, but it is not achievable for every book. So I think that can be tricky. And I think it's important that an editor, is clear and honest about what they're going to try and do with the novel. And some books do get more attention than others. And so it's about having those conversations and, you know, at acquisition, you or your agent sort of asking what the publisher's plans are. And you're very within your rights to ask all of that stuff. So I would say that, I mean, the bookshop stuff is hard because, you know, we put books into the supermarkets and T.G. Jones and W.H. Smith Travel and then Waterstones and independent bookshops. And so like all of those accounts are handled by different salespeople, and we have sales reps. And it's, you know, different accounts will take different quantities, but it's quite rare for Waterstones to take a really big quantity of an unknown author. They just won't take that kind of risk. And so I think it can be hard for authors who sort of reach publication day and think they're going to be able to just walk into Waterstones and the book be on display, when in reality they might have to ask for it, or there might only be one or two copies. And that doesn't mean that's like that forever. You know, you can have a book that becomes a big hit and then Waterstones will take a big order, or if you reach a more, you know, a higher status in terms of your sales, then you'll get bigger orders. That's just how it works. So I think that is probably one. And I think as well, I think it's I don't know. I think financially it's tricky. I mean, I think authors get paid really different sums. Like the biggest deal I've ever done was for £1 million, and then the smallest one was nothing. You will do like digital first contracts where it's a higher royalties and no advance. So it can vary wildly, and it is an industry that is quite challenging to make significant steady income with, unless you are very successful. And of course you can be very successful and it is doable, but again, that's a smaller proportion than I think most people would imagine.
We're going to do positive now because this is Ray of Light.
Okay.
When you believe in a book, when you've bought a book, you spent a lot of money on it, you love it, you think this could really be something special. What does that process look like internally when you're really championing something?
Well, I try to just raise everyone's attention of the book. So I send emails around with quotes on. So if I get a book that I really love and we've already acquired it, then when I get quotes in, I'll send those around to all the company and the sales teams and just remind them about the brilliant endorsements we're getting. I give people copies and proofs, and I tell people in person, you got to read this, and I make sure it's in all our presentations. And yeah, I really try to champion my authors. And when I find a new manuscript and I want to buy it, it is really exciting, like finding something that you love. And then it starts to feel a bit pressurizing, actually, particularly at this time of year, because you think, oh my God, what if another editor reads this more quickly, or buys it before me, or what if I don't get it? Like you can feel the kind of adrenaline kicking in when you really love something. I don't find stuff that I really love that often, sadly, but I would like to. And then I send that round and I take it to an acquisitions meeting and we have to talk about it with the team. And that can be quite nerve-wracking as well, because not always, the team don't always like it. They might not agree with me. And, as an editor, you're kind of putting yourself out there on a regular basis because people are judging your taste as well. And that can be quite scary, especially in a new company like I am now. So yeah, and then it goes through that process and we do the costing, etc. And then hopefully we get sign off to offer. And that's really exciting as well. And yeah, it's a nerve-wracking process for editors as well, because you don't know whether you're going to get it. And if you're in an auction situation, that can be a lot of work as well. But yeah, it's a really exciting feeling when you find a new writer. And I can still remember where I was when I read some of like the books that have been, what's some of my favorite books that I've published. I can still remember getting the manuscripts and like sitting and reading them and feeling so excited.
So nice to hear, because I see it from the author's side, where you have this kind of the excitement and the nerves, and it's nice to hear it happens on the other side as well.
Mm.
I remember when Everything Is Beautiful went out, it was a preempt in the end. It was taken by a publisher that I'd worked with before, but everything happened all at once. And it was suddenly like it was 6 o'clock in the evening, and I had a call from my agent saying, "Oh, we've got this. We need to decide what we're going to do." And I was in the middle of giving my son a bath, and I was like, "Oh, husband, take over." I can't hear the sort of
Oh,
splashing in the background just before it happens. And when that happens, it's so
yeah.
exciting from the author side of things, because you spend all this time, as you know, writing a book, and whether anyone will love it at the end, you never really
Yeah.
know. So when they do, it's great. And you can tell when people in a publishing house are really behind something, because I got emails, people saying, "Oh, I've specially requested to work on this book because I love it," and that kind of thing. It's where it all kind of you can
Mm.
feel the enthusiasm. That's what you want from a creative career.
The best publishing experience I've had are when we're all really working as a team. So me
Yes.
and the marketing person and the publicist, particularly, sort of doing everything together. And we really all love the book so much and championing it together. And that kind of team effort really, really works. And yeah, if you can find a marketing person or a publicist who really gets the book and really loves the
Mhm.
genre, they're definitely worth their weight in gold.
You ever get book envy? I sometimes get book envy, where I read a book and I say, "Oh, this is so good. I wish I'd written it." Do you sometimes find that when you're acquiring?
I actually don't necessarily get that feeling, although I do. I often think things are very good and they're much better than anything I would write. Don't know whether I feel like envious, because I think when I'm reading a great book, I just love the experience of it so much that
Mm.
I'm happy that like I get to have that experience to read it rather than having to have been the one slogging away writing it. But yeah, I mean, I think Maggie O'Farrell is such a beautiful writer. Like I read
Yes.
when I read her stuff, I'm like, God, how does she do this? And I sometimes wish I was a more unusual writer. Like, I think there are writers, a bit like someone like Emma Cline is a very interesting writer in the way that she chooses language. And I sometimes wish that I had the wherewithal to do that. Some writers have much more distinctive styles than me. And yeah, so I suppose I probably do feel a bit envious, but I don't know whether it happened. I think now I think about it, then I am envious. But when I'm reading, I don't feel that, because I get very absorbed in what I'm reading.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, isn't it? I find, because I sometimes think, oh, I'd like to write in a different tone of voice to kind of the one
Oh,
that I'm used to. But whenever I try and do it, I feel very affected and
yeah,
like it's not natural.
yeah,
However I write, it sort of comes out in the same style. You write
yeah.
very beautifully, very stylishly, and but things are very pacey and moving on all the time.
It's hard, isn't it? Because I think, yeah, you have a sort of natural voice
Mm.
that comes out. And I struggle with that as well, especially when writing I really, not great at writing male characters. I find that really hard. And I remember my agent, when one of the books has got a male character, and my agent was like, this just that does not sound like a man. And it's hard to differentiate between characters. You have to try and get into their voice. And a lot of my books have multiple points of view, and I have
Yes.
to work. I would say that's one of the things I work at the hardest. And I always get that feedback in editorial letters that the voices sound a bit too similar. So it's trying to differentiate those voices more.
Because you write lots of things where you've got different points of view, but same sort of age, socio-demographic status, and then it's
Yeah.
differentiating. That must be quite tricky to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you're right. Because I think in quite a few of them, yeah, the last one, The Trip, was two couples, and the one before that was a group of four friends. And again, yeah, they were all quite a similar age. So that
Mhm.
I had to go back through and try and give them more distinguishing features. I also never, I also never describe people as to, in terms of what they look like. I quite often forget to add
Don't
any kind of
either.
physicality in. And then I get that feedback quite a lot from my agent or an editor saying, well, what does this person actually look like? And it's because I think I'm not a very visual person, because in my head, I don't really picture them.
Yes.
I don't really think about what they look like. I'm just thinking about what's inside, I suppose, and their character. And I'm not really thinking about what color hair they have. But I know that you do need to add that in to help the reader picture. So I always have to add it in afterwards.
I'm exactly the same. I think about their essence and kind of what they're
Mm,
like you were saying, what they're like on the inside. And in a way, I don't really care
yeah.
what hair color they have,
No.
but people want to be
No.
able to visualize it. So sometimes I think
Yeah.
it's nice though if you leave it completely to people's imaginations so they can imagine
Yeah.
anyone. But yeah, a few
Yeah.
little anchor points just to help them in how they're thinking about people can be useful. Now, moving to that to your writing specifically, I'd love to know a little bit more about The Trip, which is your most recent book. Can you tell us more about the inspiration behind that, maybe?
Yes. So the trip is set in Thailand, and it is about two couples who go away on holiday together. And when they're out there, one of them meets a man from her past who she thought was long gone. And it is a lot about friendship dynamics. One of the couples is much more well off than the other couple. So I wanted to write a little bit about class and how that can affect people in their 30s, and, having different income levels from your friends. And each of the characters does have a secret. So as the book goes on, you kind of unravel what their secrets are. But the main plot driver is the man who's reappeared from one of the characters' pasts. And yeah, it was quite difficult writing this one for some reason. The edits were quite hard, and I went round and round the houses with it. I think we changed the ending a few times, but I'm really happy with it now.
I found it quite reassuring. You're a top editor, and yet you had difficult edits with your book. How
Mm.
does the editing process work for you as an editor, receiving edits from an editor? How does it feel? Because I sometimes get edits and I think, oh, I wish I'd thought of this myself. But you need that outside perspective often, I think. Tell me how it
Yeah,
works.
I think you do need the outside perspective. I mean, it's probably the same as it works for anyone else. I mean, I get my edit letter from my editor, and I do get quite nervous. Yeah, I get nervous about what she's going to say, and I get anxious that I'm going to have to do a really big rewrite. I've had to do some really big rewrites on some of my novels, and I do get pretty stressed because, especially with like thrillers, I think it's so difficult if one plot change like unravels everything, and everything has a knock-on effect because they're quite
Yes.
plot driven. So I can get myself really tangled up plot wise. I've definitely cried over edits before. It's a great feeling having finished them, and it's one of those things where I usually like read it and I'm like, no, don't want to do that, don't agree with that. And then I basically start doing it, and then I'm like, oh, okay, that actually is better. Like, actually, that does make more sense. I mean, I always say to the editor, like, thank you so much, and I just get on with it. I don't really communicate that I get stressed to the editor, but sometimes I do to my agent. She's very kind to put up with me. But yeah, it's tricky, I think, the editorial process. If it's a lot, and some books needed more than others. I always remember, yeah, like I said, The Trip was really challenging. And then The Girl Next Door, which is my second book, was really challenging. And the others were okay. Those two were definitely the worst edit wise. And yeah, they'll stay with you.
Yes, it does. The Trip, if you had to pitch it as a hook, this is a hard question because it's your own book, how would you describe it?
I'd say it's a psychological thriller set in Thailand about two couples who go on what they think is the holiday of a lifetime, and it turns out not to be. Something like that. But
Oh,
that sounds
brilliant.
quite generic now I'm saying it out loud. So I'd probably should add something in more about the stranger from the past that comes to derail the holiday. Maybe I would add a line about that. But yeah, I'm a lot better at pitching other people's books than pitching my own, I
It's
think.
really
I
hard
always
to do
find it
your
really
own,
hard.
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Great. You must love everything about books because you've built a career all around it. The writing process, what's your favourite bit?
I love starting something new. I find
Mhm.
that really fun and exciting. So I would say like the first 10, 20, 30,000 words, I'm still in that excited new phase of a new idea and finding the characters' voices and uncovering the story. I really enjoy that. And I do like writing the end. It's basically everything in the middle that is harder. I do like I like the process of having written. I do sometimes find when you're in that middle section of the book, like 50, 60,000 words or whatever, and it's just not flowing, that can be a real slog. And I think that's the point at which you have to say to yourself, like, this is my job. Like, I'm getting paid for this. I've got to like sit down and do it, even on the days where you don't really want to, or the times where you feel like it's hard. You have to try and find a way to push through. And I quite often will finish a book and then say, "Oh, I'm never writing another book again." And then I somehow always do. So I guess there must be something that I do love about it. And I'll tell you what I do love is, when you get in that kind of flow state when you've been writing for hours and you just haven't noticed the time going past. I really love that feeling. And I feel writing is one of the only times where I'm just not thinking about anything else. I'm not like worrying about anything else at work or my personal life or anything. I'm just like very absorbed in the writing process. And it's one of the only things I do where I can sort of look at the clock and it might be 9 a.m. and then I'll look at it again and it's like 2 p.m. So I think it's called a flow state. So yes, I do like that aspect of writing for sure.
You've said the hardest bit is that 50, 60,000 words, sticky middle area. Is that the hardest bit of writing for you? Or do you secretly hate edits?
Well, I don't love the edit process as I do. I think I do get worried about edits. And if they're things I can see a way to doing, then that's fine. But if I can't think how to make it the way the editor wants, I get quite stressed. I mean, there was one book that I did throw away. I'm just thinking of it now. I'd kind of forgotten, but I threw away like a whole book, like 90,000 words a few years ago. And God, that book was a total mess. And actually, there's a whole other book I'm now remembering, which I sent to my agent a few years ago, I think before we did the second deal, which I think she didn't think was quite right. But you've got to pick yourself up and start again.
Do you ever push back on edits as a writer? And as an editor, how do you feel if a writer pushes back to you on something?
Mm. I have pushed back as a writer a few times, yes. I've asked for more clarity on an
Mhm.
edit, or I've said, "Oh, I really think this will be better instead." I do find that quite hard to do. I always feel bad doing that. But actually, as an editor, I don't mind if an author does that. I think it's difficult if you work with an author who really won't take any edits on. That's not
Yes.
great, and it makes the relationship quite challenging. So I would advise that in general, it is good to listen to your editor, but I suppose I would say that. But I definitely don't mind if they think, "Oh, that bit doesn't quite feel right or doesn't make sense," because I always say, "Okay, then like it is their book." And I think for me, it's my job to point out the potential things that need fixing with the book. But if there's a different way to fix them that the author prefers, then that's totally fine. And I do want an author to feel happy with the final product. I don't want them to think, "Oh, this book now isn't the book I wanted to write." I would never want to take that kind of integrity away from a writer that I was working with. So I try and be quite flexible with the editorial process.
Yeah, I always think if an editor flags something, there probably is an issue. Like they're not making things up. And I almost even if originally I think, oh no, it's fine, they're just being fussy. You look back and you think there is a problem. But often the solution that the editor suggests isn't the one that I end up going with. I think, right, think more
Well,
broadly, what can I do, what other ways could I solve this?
yeah,
And that seems to be an approach that works quite well because it's still your book, it still comes from you, but you're listening and
yeah,
taking note of something that's been raised as an issue.
yeah. I think so. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good way to approach it.
And we've talked maybe more for established writers. For a new writer, what's one piece of advice you'd give to them?
Well, if you're trying to get published, I do always say I think it's best to get an agent. I
Hmm.
think agents do open a lot of doors in the publishing industry still. There are places where you can get published without an agent, but I think in general, if you want a long-term writing career, having an agent is really beneficial. I think it's important to know that there will be rejection along the way and that it is a kind of up and down journey. I always think the goalposts move. So, like for ages, I just wanted to get published, and then it's like, okay, now you want a new deal, and then you want film, and then you want foreign rights, and you always want the next thing. I think that's just normal, and there is a lot that you can't control. So I think it's important that as a writer you accept that and sort of go with it. So I think for new writers, yeah, it's about accepting you can't control the whole process, but that you can control, your writing and writing the best book that you possibly can, and that if the first one doesn't sell, then the second one might. I know tons and tons of authors who didn't sell their debuts and have gone on to do really well. So you only need one person to say yes, one editor. You don't need every publishing house in London offering. Obviously, that would be nice, but you don't actually need it. So I think it's important to hang on to that as well. And then there is an element of luck that goes into getting published
Yes.
as well. So it's important to remember that. And I think it's really important that you do other things and that you don't make it your whole life. And you have interests outside publishing and writing that can help keep you a bit feet on the ground. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about AI and what your attitude is, whether you have any fears around it, what impact it might have on the publishing industry.
Yeah, it is a big topic. And we have ChatGPT licenses at work, which we're encouraged to use. So we do use ChatGPT for some things. The way we're trying to approach it as a business at SNS is that it should be used to save time on things that are sort of non-creative. So I hope that the publishing industry can use AI in a way that cuts down on some of the, for want of a better word, like grunt work, things like updating metadata and keywords behind the scenes. And a lot of assistants have to do very time consuming jobs that could potentially be done by AI. But I do not want to use AI for anything creative. I don't really use it for anything creative. And I certainly wouldn't want a book to be written by AI. I suppose there are worries, yes, around, the fact that some AI will be used by authors and that books might lack that integrity. I'm sure there are books on Amazon selling that are written by AI, but I don't get overly worried about it on a personal level because I think it's one of those things that is coming and we just need to embrace it in the right way. And I would like to think that we are smart enough as a human race to kind of use it for good, not bad. And I do understand why authors worry about it. And I think there are some elements of the publishing industry that are worried about it in terms of their job. So, for example, translation is a big one, audio recordings, things like that. I can see a world where those jobs could become at risk, and I don't want that to happen. So, yeah, it is problematic, but I don't know really what the answer is because I think it's sort of unstoppable at this point. So we should try and use it for the right reasons.
You must read so many books. Is there a book you've read recently that you loved, but maybe you think hasn't yet had the attention it deserves?
I have a fun book coming up called The Scandalous Ladies Football Club, and it's by Frances Quinn, and it's historical fiction, and it's about a group of women who start a football club in Victorian times. So I think that's quite fun and topical. Obviously, we've got the
Good.
Lionesses in England, and I think women's football is fun, and she writes really accessible historical fiction. So I'm excited to publish that later in the year, in the summer.
Sounds really exciting. Thank you. And it's got a great hook as well, doesn't it? You can know straight away, I
Yeah,
can imagine what
yeah,
that will be.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Um, and now, aside from writing and publishing, if you have any time left, where do you find light and happiness in your life?
Oh, that's nice. Well, I do quite a lot of exercise. I do kickboxing twice a week, which is really fun. And I'm also in a amateur dramatics group, a local one in Dulwich, which is good fun as well. And we put on plays. And I really love that because it's just nothing to do with the publishing industry. And it introduces you to a whole new set of people and people from all walks of life. I just auditioned for our next show last night, actually. And yeah, it's a great way of kind of taking yourself out of the publishing world.
Oh, wow. Brilliant. Thank you. Well, Phoebe, thank you so much. I absolutely loved that glimpse into both sides of the publishing world. And the trip is out now and absolutely fantastic. So thank you, everyone, for listening. If you've enjoyed Ray of Light, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can find me at Eleanor Ray Books on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, and I'd really love to hear from you and hear what you think. And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, perhaps you might like my books too. My most recent novel is called See the Stars, and it's out now in paperback. It's a story about finding meaning and connection when life doesn't go to plan. So see you next time for more conversations about reading, writing, and happiness.